Welcome everyone. We're going to take a look at the cross-hatching technique in graphite with our good old Pear. There's our reference photography, and just a reminder, I'm drawing from life, not from the photograph. The photograph is there for you to see a little bit better what I'm able to see. My initial drawing here will be pretty loose. I don't need it to be totally outlined like a coloring book or a cartoon drawing. I'm going to keep it pretty responsive to the edge, with a little bit of more of an angular mark rather than a perfect curve here at the beginning. Roughing in very lightly, and this is all being done with an HB pencil. Cast shadows. I want to know where my forms are, where my shapes are. I'm going to get started here on one of the darkest points on the form, and this is a really sharp B lead. So this is, again, a little bit softer than an HB. This is one of my go-to leads when I'm working with cross-hatching because I'm able to get pretty dark and maintain a sharp point for a little bit longer period of time. You find those softer pencil weights will end up being dulled really quick, so you get a flat edge. And I'm starting to get that here a little bit on the cast shadows I lay these strokes in, so I spun my pencil around a little bit just to make sure that it kind of stays consistent. Consistent line is pretty important. I'm laying these in with a wash, essentially. I know where my shadow shape is, and I'm literally washing the shadow side darker. And I'm going to do it with a little bit of a faceted approach. So those were at a certain angle. I'm looking at the bottom edge there with a different angle, and then it rotates over to the other side and connects up. And then kind of a bridge between them. A little straighter, a little more vertical. Then I'll bring that crosshatch back over top. Transitions from the left side to the right side. I'm always looking for transition. I'm always looking for how this pattern of strokes connects to the next pattern. I went back to a 2B pencil here. It was freshly sharpened and really doesn't have that much of a difference between the B and the 2B. Sometimes convenience takes over. I allow it to extend beyond that original shape a little bit. That helps soften the edge. Gives that penumbra shape a little bit of clarity. And move into the background. Backgrounds you want to have be quiet. And so oftentimes a vertical line, horizontal line kind of reads like a mesh screen that we have been sort of taught to understand as a window screen that we look through. So the calmness of the verticals and kind of a horizontal will be useful to separate the form in the foreground from the background. So right now I'm literally just making these vertical. I'm not trying to go line from the bottom to the top in one long stroke, but allow some gaps. The feathered edge at the bottom there, you can see it's much lighter. It allows for the overlap to exist without creating too much of a marker overlap, kind of banding effect. But even if it does happen, because it does a little bit back there, I'm going to come in from a different direction. It's going to be turned into a darker value anyway. So I'm going to start doing that here. Start on the edge that I want to define with the actual figure and work away from it. Whatever I do on this side, I want to think about how it's going to maintain continuity on the left side. So that diagonal needs to absolutely happen over there as well. Otherwise, it can start to feel like it's being visually affected by the foreground figure. We're going to end up seeing that background be a little less textured ultimately. It's going to start to smooth out as we go. Bringing in another angle to help that process. But keeping it calm in the background so that there's no noise that takes away from the primary figure. It's a little darker near the base, and it gets a little lighter near the top. Keep an eye on that as we get going. But you still have a really strong no-tan relationship right now, right? The white is really a clean, stark shape. I'm starting just a little bit right now to feather in the halftones, but it's separate from the shadow side. So that no-tan relationship we've been working on, we want to keep thinking about it. It's really one of the keys to getting a little bit more representational. I'm absolutely saving those highlights. You can see a couple little spots that don't have any pencil lines on it. I'm trying to save those moments and wash everything else back. And when I was working in the light side, I was working with an H. So I definitely shifted away from the B pencil. Here I'm thinking about what angle I need to take. It's got to cross what I've already done there, so it's got to come in from a different angle. But more importantly, it's got to feel like it's a table surface angle. It should feel like it's consistent with what I would use to describe that surface. Just as I come in here with another angle on the pear, it's got to feel like I could put a rubber band around it with that angle and it would still make sense. And so again, usually that's about transitions. If all of a sudden you introduce an angle that is different from what's surrounding it, it's going to feel different and it's going to stand out and it's not going to attach to the form as much. So as much as you can, you think about transitional moments, little lines that start to feather into other areas. Right there. So there's a moment in the reflected light right now that's only vertical lines. That'll need to adjust because it doesn't feel like it connects to the core shadow yet. As I bring that shadow up from the cast shadow on the form, I'm wrapping it around and I'm wrapping it up around here so they angle up towards the top right corner a little bit more now. And now I'm bringing over that reflected light a little transitional cross to make sure that it connects. But it's not done. It's always a work in progress. Ultimately this little drawing probably took me about 30 minutes. So even though it's sped up right now, I'm not drawing this fast. It's more deliberate. There's a lot of kind of thinking through it. Which is the right direction? Which is the right line? It might be a little hesitation moment. You might call the play out in the air a little bit and draw that line as if you're imagining it being drawn, but don't actually put the paper and pencil together yet. Now I'm using an HB here as that transitional penumbra and cast shadow from the top of the pear and the stem feel much brighter. So the 2B and the B that I was using within the cast shadow on the ground with the darkest point needs to get a little bit harder. Just like in the background, I'm using an H now, where that feels like more of the light in the picture rather than the shadow. It shouldn't be a 2B, it shouldn't be a 6B, because that will create a different kind of contrast. It'll create more texture. It'll make darker moments than I really want there. So the consistency across the board will kind of suffer as a result. But anything I make here in the light here, I'm going to bring a transitional moment into the cast shadow. You saw me make a couple marks, dragging those diagonals into the shadow, so it wasn't all of a sudden out of left field, a totally different angle. And I'm going to go in with a more horizontal in the background, smooth it out, flatten it out a little bit more. These lines going across the core shadow now, they start to reinforce or darken some of the initial lines. And that's absolutely okay. You may not hit that line the right value the first time, and you've got to make it darker. So it's okay. Some areas may start to feel a little bit more blended, a little smoother tone than others, but if it's built up with cross-hatching and directional hatching, we're going to be fine. So it is a continual process of reference. What's the figure like compared to the background? What's this side of the figure look like compared to the other side? Light and shadow on the form versus cast shadow on the ground. Make those reference points. And we're bringing in a little bit more detail towards the light half, specifically allowing for the texture or the space between some of the lines to be more visible, similar to what you might find on a golf ball or the craters of the moon. So that top, where that highlight is, much brighter. As we move down towards the belly, right about there, it's darker. So there's a fall off of light to even the highlights across the overall form. And really, we're starting to get towards final touches. I'm softening edges to the cast shadow. Getting the continuity there of the horizontals to be a little bit more consistent from the left side to the right side, so it's not just all of a sudden different. And if I need to brighten it, the kneaded eraser is my friend here. A little bit of a sharper edge there helps draw this out of the background. But I'm totally cool with losing that edge as it transitions over the border. Want a little bit more gradient into that reflected light. And make sure those horizontals line up. Working on the continuity in the background. Now the horizontals aren't going to go all the way to the right, but I'm transitioning from the left side to the other side of the pear. And that's what's important right now. Pushing that gradient right to left in the background so it feels like there's some light. And there's a good scan on the final piece. Make sure that you do these from a couple different angles, not just always vertical. Get to know that form, and be sure that you've got a good sense of light and shadow. So a direct light source is key here. Good luck, everyone.